Hi, we're about to start our webinar on the top KPIs, the key performance indicators to adopt in AP to make sure you have the very best performance in 2023. We have two of our IFOL experts waiting to lead us through the must-haves and maybe the nice-to-haves. It's all about getting the basics right. People are just joining us now. If you'd like to say hi, introduce yourself in the chat. We can see where you are. And please use the chat for questions or suggestions that you may have throughout this session. We'll just give it a couple of moments so people can join us. Okay, so welcome to our first webinar of the year. I'm Sue Beardsmore, and today we'll be looking at the top KPIs for any AP department in 2023. We're joined by two of our IFOL experts. They're the people responsible for delivering live virtual masterclasses each month for our members and students. And by the way, if you're not already a member, there is a link in the chat where you can sign up, and that will give you access to all our previous webinars, research papers, and the networks to help you in your role. So today on the panel, we have Caroline Adams, who has over 20 years experience in shared services as a senior finance manager and in IT. She's built teams, led them through significant change, and is particularly focused on payables. She's also aware of the importance of getting the appropriate resources to support procure to pay within an organization. And she's got some strong suggestions on the best KPIs to keep you on the right track. Hi, Caroline.
Hi, Sue.
And Sam Hitchin-Ray is with us too. He's the Partnerships Director of the Institute of Financial Operations and Leadership. Hi, Sam.
Hi, Sue.
Now, we'll be providing you with a best practice guide following this session, so there's no need to make any notes. And as I said, you're welcome to put any questions or suggestions you have in the chat, and we'll do our best to pick them up as we go along. We're going to kick off with a poll, not entirely serious poll, but it'll give us somewhere to start. So please join in. We're interested in the number of KPIs. How many different KPIs do you track for AP in your department where you are? Just one choice, none, 1 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 50, or you have no idea because somebody else is looking after all of that. So how many different KPIs do you track for AP? None, 1 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 50, or you have no idea. And while people are making up their minds or deciding what they do know, Caroline, is there such a thing as an average number of KPIs? What are the most and maybe the fewest that you've ever worked with?
I've been thinking about this, Sue, because obviously in working in various roles and organisations, I think the biggest number I saw was something like 85, which is just unbelievable. And I would say I don't class it as a KPI. It's more about data collection rather than a key performance indicator. So yeah, that's the largest that I've seen.
Okay, well, our audience has come back with what they think. So none, 15%, 1 to 5, 58%, 5 to 10, 8%, 10 to 20, 12%, 20 to 50, thank goodness, nobody. And there's a few people out there who aren't quite sure what's going on in their organisation, but I'm sure that's because somebody else is looking after it. So is that what you'd expect, more or less?
Me personally, absolutely, yeah. No more than 10, and 5 isn't 5. I think it depends on the area that you're responsible for, and what those key performance indicators should be for each of those areas. So if you only had one area, you're likely to have fewer than if you've got APAR or cash and banking reporting into you. So it's always going to be varied.
Yeah. I know it'll come out as we go through the specific KPIs we'll be looking at, but are all KPIs equal? Are they all created equal? And are they all equally important all of the time? Just a couple of words about that before we set off on them.
So Sam and I have had quite a heated discussion on this, going back and forwards, and it's never about who's right and who's wrong, but everyone's ideas are obviously important. We didn't get to a concise answer, did we, Sam?
No, we agreed to disagree, I think, on that one.
Okay, well, tell us your ideas about it then. Go on.
Well, basically, I think it depends on where you are as an AP function. So whether you've got everything is manual, or you're part automated, or you're fully automated, as to what exactly it is you want to measure. There's no point in saying to someone who's totally manual, tell us your straight through processing invoice processing KPIs, because number one, they probably haven't got a clue what you're talking about, and number two, they haven't even started the journey. So it's about focusing first about what it is you're trying to look at, where you are in that journey, and therefore what those KPIs are going to be. And for me personally, they fall into a couple of categories, which is our compliance and efficiency, productivity, and then working capital, Sue.
Okay, so despite your disagreements or your discussions, I think you've come up with a kind of a list of 10, round about 10. I'm going to whiz through them. I know we won't be speaking about each of them in depth, but I'm going to whiz through the 10, and then we'll look at them under the areas that you've suggested, Caroline. That's compliance, efficiency and productivity, and working capital opportunities. So the ones that you agreed to agree on, with various levels of how important they are: cost to process a single invoice, the time to process a single invoice, invoices processed per day per full-time equivalent, invoices linked to a PO, the invoice exception rate, straight through invoice processing where relevant, suppliers that submit invoices electronically, early payment discounts captured, on-time payments, and days payable outstanding. So they're the 10, and we won't probably be going outside of those because we think they're the good 10 to be looking at. So the areas, let's start with compliance. And I think you've nominated about three of the KPIs to talk about there. So I think you mentioned invoices linked to a PO as part of compliance. Do you want to address that a little bit?
Sam, do you want to take that one, or do you want me to answer it?
Yeah, I think I'll give my piece on this one, but I think it's probably important to say we're coming at things from two different angles here, and this is why we probably clashed on opinions the other day when we were chatting this through. I'm not from a finance background. I'm coming at it from input that I've had from members that I've spoken to, and what my personal point of views would be on these KPIs. Whereas you, Caroline, you're an expert. You're an expert in finance. You've worked in the industry for how many years, and at senior levels, and you'll have a bit more knowledge on the day-to-day issues that you face in the finance department as well. But going back to what we were talking about in terms of compliance, I think a good KPI is definitely measuring the amount of invoices that are linked to a purchase order or a purchase.
If you have purchase orders, Sam. If
you're using purchase orders, and certainly if you've got a no PO, no pay policy in place as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think measuring the amount of POs that are linked to invoices are going to help you to uncover other issues in your AP process as well, and also probably uncover who the not so good approvers are on purchase orders as well. Okay. So yeah, I definitely think that's a key KPI for you to be measuring this year. What are your thoughts, Caroline?
Yeah, again, going back to what I've just said, it depends where you are on the journey and whether your organisation uses purchase orders, because if you don't use purchase orders, the alternative KPI, if you like, would be approval. So where is the approval bottleneck? How long are they with those approvers? And probably to the point of naming and shaming the areas that are causing delays in invoice processing. So it's just an alternative. If you don't use purchase orders, then I would use workflow approvers if you've got workflow, and if not, just approvers, which you can calculate manually.
Okay, so two of your top ones, Caroline, in this area, I think, were the invoice exception rate and on-time payments as measures. Would you like to give us a few words about those?
Yeah, if I do the invoice exception rate, so again, this is all back to compliance and where they're costing your business and your team time and money, whether it's how the invoice is laid out, is it missing key criteria, is it in the right currency, if you've got data processing, imaging software, is it recognizing it? Is it on the wrong color paper? There's all sorts of compliance things that you have, and every one of those costs the business time and money. And so and it obviously causes delays in processing the invoice and therefore potentially paying that invoice on time. And what we've always been quite vocal about is to our suppliers, if you submit an invoice that's non-compliant, when you resubmit it, really the payments clock should start from then. That doesn't necessarily happen in real world, but that is the threat of trying to get suppliers to produce compliant invoices.
Okay.
Sam, do you want to say anything before we move on to pay on time?
To be honest, I was ready to jump onto on-time payments. This one I've been quite keen to get onto.
And me.
All right, let's give a lot of time to this one then. Off we go.
That's it. I think definitely from my point of view, I think on-time payments is massively key in terms of KPIs. Should definitely be tracked. Everyone wants to know how many suppliers you're paying on time, and also with things like in the UK, for instance, the duty to report now on payment practices, where you're reporting on how many invoices you receive and how many companies how many suppliers you're paying on time, or within 30 days, above 30 days, etc., which will all contribute to your ESG reporting and ESG rating as well. I think it's absolutely critical that businesses or AP managers, leaders, finance leaders are tracking how many payments are on time. But then also looking at it from another perspective, we've got difficult times ahead, probably pretty much globally really, but certainly in the UK from a financial perspective, in terms of the economy. And if you're not making payments on time and you're opening yourself up or the business up to late payment fees, etc., then it's going to have an issue on working capital, etc., within the business. So yeah, on-time payments critical. And I'm just going to throw this in there that at IFOL we've got the British Payment Practices Awards that we're launching later this year as well, which is something that where we'll be rewarding and awarding companies who have been really good performers in terms of paying suppliers early or on time throughout the year based on their duty to report reports. So as a business, if you are based in the UK and you want to be part of that, then make sure you're paying your suppliers on time.
Caroline, do you want to add anything there in the realms of compliance, how it affects compliance?
Yeah, because one of the first challenges, so I'll step back a bit from that. An accounts payable area is there to pay their suppliers. We do not deliberately pay suppliers late. I think that's really, really important for businesses out there to understand. And no one deliberately pay suppliers late, and if they do, it means there's a problem. There's a problem with the process, or something hasn't worked, and everyone needs to jump on board with understanding that there will always be suppliers paid late for whatever reason. But it's about focusing your process and your controls to ensure that you're addressing the bottlenecks and the holdups by your KPIs to identify what is causing you as a business to pay suppliers late. I am very vocal on this subject, as Sam knows, because I'm very passionate about small businesses, and it doesn't matter where you are in the world. At the moment, I'm working for a global vet company, and it's really, really important for them that the clinics are able to use their local vendors with the knowledge that those vendors are going to get paid on time. So what matters to them is, I'll say, I don't know, I'll pick on something, the window cleaner. It's important for the windows to be cleaned. It's important that that supplier is paid on time, week in, week out. Might be very small in value. The biggest challenge to an AP team is, how do you recognise a small vendor? How do you ensure that those vendors get paid on time? Or in the UK, the best practice at the moment is below 30 days. And in fact, the Small Business Commissioner has just published a paper today. Haven't had a chance to read it, but I'm sure it's very, very focused on small businesses. So something that was very telling, and it was used as an example in something I attended before Christmas, was about, and it's a true story, and it was about, well, if you look at, I can't remember the exact trade it was, but that company were unable to pay their employees. Those employees couldn't go out and do their grocery shopping, and therefore they weren't able to feed their families. And I think if you can not, it's just not about vocalizing, but if you can sell the story internally, your CFO does not want you paying suppliers late. Nobody in that business. It's just about getting them to understand. So I know that's a very long answer, but paying your suppliers on time, and your suppliers can look on the duty to report government website, and they can choose to work with you as a business or not work with you as a business based on the stats that you have to publish in the UK for paying on time, or more importantly, not paying on time. So long answer, Sue, but something very passionate about.
No. Okay, so let's move on. They were the three that you'd identified with compliance, and two of them come into efficiency and productivity as well. Let's look at some of the others in efficiency and productivity. Now, we started off with cost, the number one on the list, but not necessarily the number one in importance, Caroline, I know. The cost to process a single invoice, that's a KPI, but the one that you were particularly keen on in this category, or one of the ones that you'd identified, was the time to process a single invoice.
Yeah.
And would you like to talk about that, as why it matters?
Yeah. And most of the KPIs that we're talking about today are all linked in together. So they will cross a lot of the different categories that we've done. But time to process an invoice is really linked into your cost to process in a single invoice as well. So we all know as a function that we're an overhead to a business, and therefore the more efficiently we can process documents, answer queries, do reconciliations, and pay our suppliers, then that will reduce our overhead and our costs to that business, and therefore make it more profitable. Time to process a single invoice will depend upon whether the invoice is electronic or paper or PDF, if you use scanning software. And it is all about costs, but it's not just costs in time, it's also about missed opportunities. So if we're not getting our invoices through in a timely manner, then we miss opportunities for taking early payment discounts. We might be incurring late payment fees. There's all sorts of, supplier dissatisfaction because we're always processing their invoices late, which then can commercially impact on the buying teams or procurement teams in a business on how they procure. So it's really, really important to process an invoice. And and what I'm saying to you is all common sense, really, but people lose sight sometimes of the basics. So you're on mute.
Yeah, I am. Sorry. Sometimes when you're faced with a KPI and just as a thing to measure, it's good to understand why you're measuring it, isn't it? Because that makes everybody buy into it. Sam, do you want to add anything to to this time to process a single invoice?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, looking at it as a logical thing. I think it's key that you need to understand how long it takes for your department, team, business to process an invoice. Because, for instance, if you're going out and setting up payment terms with suppliers at 30 days, for instance, but it takes you 31 days to process an invoice, all of your payments are going to be late. You're never going to be able to make payments within the terms that you're agreeing with suppliers. So I think personally, you do need to know, how long it takes to process each invoice. As Caroline mentioned, it's also about missed opportunities, the vendor discounts for early payments. It's then on the flip side about late payment fees as well. It's taking you a long time to process the invoices. You're not going to get the payments out on time, and then ultimately you're going to be whacked with extra fees and charges, which doesn't look great for the department. So yeah, time to process an invoice, I think it's definitely up there as a top KPI for this year.
Okay, well, another one identified as a top one in this efficiency and productivity: invoices processed per day per full-time equivalent. Caroline, do you want to kick us off on this one? Because this was one that you had highlighted, wasn't it?
Yeah. So in your data processing area, you will have a set number of FTE based probably on the invoice volumes you process in a year. And the business is always looking for ways of reducing you as an overhead to the business, or investing. If you're going to do an automation project, it's looking for a rate of return, and that usually results in a reduction in FTE that can be placed elsewhere to do added value and things like that. So looking at invoices processed per FTE is an important one, and it's about knowing what it is you're trying to measure. So how do you set the target? How do you set a standard for how many per operator of invoices they should be able to get through on a day? And what you're going to do with that information. So if you're at the start of the journey and you haven't automated, that's purely is going to take obviously a lot longer. You're going to do less, which is all common sense. But if you've invested in software, and let's say most people this day and age are using scanning software, because not everybody's got EDI or another type of electronic invoice coming in. So when it's going through your scanning software, how do you know that you're getting the performance promised by the software vendor for the invoices that you're processing, unless you're measuring it? So one of the things we used to do is set a benchmark, and that was done by various ways, by doing in user acceptance testing and then on the job. So you eventually come up with a standard, if you like, or a target per day of what your operators should be getting through. That gives you your throughput analysis from a FTE perspective, but also you're measuring the productivity and the efficiency of the software. So by that I mean, if when you look at the KPI and you go in and look and you talk to the people who perhaps aren't achieving standards, you will find that you need to do throughput analysis on the software, the suppliers as well. And by that I mean that when capturing on an invoice the fields, and I can't remember if it's 8 or 9 fields precisely, but you want to know that how the suppliers are presenting their invoices, is the software picking up all those fields correctly? And they call it false positives. So it might be telling you the field is green when in fact it should be red, all those types of things. And therefore it gives you the stats to be able to go back to your suppliers and go, we need to look at the way your invoices are being submitted to us as a company. We need you to look at, I don't know, might be that the currency is not contained in there, or there's something out of sync, or whatever the case may be. But unless you measure it, you can't see why you know your FTEs are not achieving the levels that you get. I think the hardest thing to do is to understand what your peers are achieving and what they've set as a standard. And I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think for a non-PO invoice, we were doing, I know I'm not even going to quote you because I can't remember. I can't remember the numbers. The other thing that we did was publish and distribute. I won't say a supplier lead because that's not good, but a supplier non-conformance, and addressed it with the various areas of the business. And also, obviously, the throughput by operator was used on their performance, and used as part of their one-to-ones as well. So yeah, really, really key.
Okay, Sam, anything to add on this one?
Pretty much just building on what Caroline kind of went into towards the end there was, for me, this KPI is brilliant for what you can use it for afterwards. So when you're, say for instance, you're hiring a new member of staff, you've got a benchmark, you've got a number of invoices that they should be processing, and they know that they should be processing each day. And then if you've got that kind of benchmark, and for some reason out of the blue 1 month that drops massively, then it kind of indicates to you that there's something wrong, something's happened, there's a, something has gone wrong, so you need to investigate it. So I think, to me, the kind of output from measuring that KPI gives you a lot of things to measure performance against moving forwards, and performance of your team moving forwards as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you both talked about invoice exception rate and on-time payments under compliance. Is there anything that you want to add to that goes towards efficiency and productivity, or do you think you've covered those two particularly?
I think from an invoice exception rate, it's clear. It's again, assuming that you're not working manually and that you're part automated rather than fully automated. It's, what does that look like? How do I do it? And I can remember when I first started in AP, there were concertina files on the desks with the suppliers' invoices. That's how long ago it was. If you wanted to see rejections, errors, I don't know what you want to call it, rather than exceptions in those days. So it's certainly moved on from where it is. Most of the software companies use streams in their software, but it's about distinguishing what the different error rates are, and then having a plan on what you're going to do with each of those errors. So if it was, I don't know, a supplier charging delivery charges that you shouldn't continuously, then you would be going, depending on your type of business, procurement or the buying teams to use their relationship as to why the supplier suddenly started to charge carriage charges and things like that. So it's having a plot and plan, but also using the software to manage those problems for you. So if you've got a no PO, no pay policy, when the invoice comes in, it should reject it back to the supplier, saying, please resubmit with purchase order. There's all sorts of things, I call them sexy things, that you can do with your rules to manage those exceptions. And that's about minimizing the amount of time your teams are spending on dealing with exceptions, and just making sure up front you know what you're going to do with all the errors.
Okay. Let's look at the ones that have come out of our list of 10 but weren't highlighted by you as, the really, really, really important ones, and maybe just a reflection on why. Is it because they're useful sometimes and not others, or they're just less useful? So we've got straight through invoice processing, which you had alluded to. That sort of depends the circumstances that you're in. Suppliers that submit invoices electronically, early payment discounts, and days payable outstanding. So under this efficiency and productivity heading, they're the ones that straight through invoice processing, suppliers that submit invoices electronically, and days payable outstanding. Where might they be useful or perhaps not so useful?
So suppliers submitting invoices electronically, again, it depends on the shape that you are as an organization and what your IT department are offering you by way of how suppliers can get invoices into you. Because if you're at this end of the scale where you've got these great software, then the software platforms have usually got portals that you can submit through. But if you're at this end of the scale, you've probably got email and not even EDI. So there's this whole scale of things. But the idea, Sue, is without talking about software vendors, the ideal is to do straight through processing. So receive an invoice electronically. It goes through a set of rules checking. If you've got three-way matching in your processes, to go through a match to a receipt and then sit on your creditor ledger and get paid. That is your P2P electronically. Most people haven't got that. You know, in the real world, not everybody's got these things. And so really it's about having a plot and plan to address suppliers to get them to submit invoices electronically. Now, unfortunately, COVID helped us do that as an AP function. That was a positive impact of COVID because we all had to work remotely. Most companies either invested in something that helped, or when suppliers weren't getting paid because they're used to sending paper invoices in, they soon learned that they could do PDF invoicing and submit it to an email address. And so from moving from paper to PDF is step one if you haven't got EDI. But if you've got large volumes, you're going through an EDI or you're going through your own software portal that does it for you. So mix and match, really.
Thank you. Sam, anything to add to any of those that were not top?
Again, going with suppliers that submit invoices electronically, I think you've got to know how many of your suppliers aren't submitting electronic invoices to kind of know how big of an issue it is for you as an organization. And like you said, Caroline, you've got to have a plan. How do you communicate this to your suppliers that you want them to start submitting electronic invoices? And ultimately, it's again, going back to your environmental governance and sustainability report, your ESG reporting, it feeds into that, because if you're more of a sustainable organization, you're only accepting electronic invoices, you're using less paper, it's better for you as an organization, it's better for the environment. So I think, you know, that KPI will help you to understand how much of an issue it is for you and your suppliers, and how high on the agenda it needs to be for you as a business to get businesses to then submit electronic invoices or move them on to e-invoicing, for instance.
Okay.
So yeah.
So shall we move on to our last category, if you like, and look at, well, you've identified one as really important under this and a couple of others, working capital opportunities. And the one identified as really helpful with this, on-time payments. So who would like to kick off with this? And silence all the way.
I think we talked about it in length at the start of this, really. So
nothing much to add.
No, but I think so. You know, everything that we've talked about at the moment is it goes back to, you know, if you don't record it, you can't measure it. If you can't measure it, you can't report on it. And if you can't track it, you can't change it. So there's all these different things that fall into the categories that we've talked about, but you've got to recognize what data it is you want to look at to do a KPI.
Yeah. So people really need to look at what they want to get out of their KPIs. I mean, it's all very well having, we've got a list of 10 and we'll run through your 4 top picks, as it were, in a moment, but people need to just use what they need for what they want ultimately, because as Sam's indicated, you know, you can record, but then in the future it can be useful for other things as well. So it's where you are, what you're doing, and you talked a little bit about Caroline, about different times, even in the economy, things that you have no control over, but they can affect what KPI put in place.
Yeah, and you're touching on working capital. So historically, when we were looking to see, well, how can we increase our working capital and where can we see opportunities, AP is a prime place to look for working capital opportunities, whether it is on your pay methods. Historically, people have used payment terms to extend working capital, using procurement cards. Again, if you've got terms less than, I think it was 55 days, by putting it on a P card, you can get credit and therefore have working capital through that. And then early payment discounts. There's lots of different ways and lots of different opportunities. But right here, right now, I don't think that's what companies are looking at. They're looking at, the global economy, supply chain issues. Can you even get what it is you want to purchase? And therefore, it's about having better relationships with your suppliers, paying them on time. It's all linked in, and therefore not so much about the working capital opportunities.
Okay, so just before we wrap up, out of the 10 that I read through, your top picks really are time to process a single invoice, invoices processed per day per full-time equivalent, invoice exception rate, and on-time payments. And as you pointed out, they connect with each other, but if you're going to have no more than 4 KPIs, definitely put those in there. Is that fair?
Fair. True, Sam?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so
Sue, there's a question in, I think. Somebody's asked a question.
Oh, I can't see it.
Okay. Shall I go in?
Yeah, you read it out. I'm sorry.
Okay. Hi, Laura. It's Laura asking the question. It says, how do we measure the time to process a single invoice, as this will be depending on the invoice complexity? Some take more or less time from AP, and do you count from the moment it's received to the moment it's paid? Yes. Okay. So the time to process the invoice is basically from the point of receipt to the point of payment. So absolutely, will that be impacted by all the things that you've just said? And that's the whole point of it. It's not about how long AP is taking to process the invoice. There is about all the factors that are impacting on it. But yes, that is how it's recorded.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for picking that up, Caroline. I'm sorry, I've just
fine.
Hopeless. Okay. So choose your KPIs carefully. Hope they help. Hope our ideas have helped. Sam, before we go, a bit about, you were talking about a couple of things to encourage good practice. Of course, the IFOL conference. Tell us a bit more about that, and the British Supplies Payment Practice Awards. Over to you.
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, at IFOL, we are launching this year the British Payment Practices Awards. So if you're a business in the UK who completes the duty to report and payment practices reports every 6 months, then you'll be included in the analysis that we're doing on businesses and their payment performance. And we'll be opening up the nominations and sending out some announcements on who's been nominated, who are the top performers, who are most improved, and lots of different categories, lots of different covering different industries. So we'll be launching that over the next few months. But in terms of what we've got going on right now, our conference schedule, we have our UK Accounts Payable and P2P Leadership Conference taking place on the 23rd of February in London, where you'll get the chance to meet Caroline face to face.
Yay!
And then we've also,
and you, Sam.
yeah, and myself, and Sue as well.
Yeah.
And so we've also got we're taking the conference to Canada and to the US as well. So if you are based in Canada or local to Toronto, we'll be in Toronto on the 26th of April, running the AP Leadership Conference in partnership with SAP Concur. And then again in April on the 19th and 20th. So it's a 2-day conference in Philadelphia. We'll be running the AP Leadership Conference there. So if you'd like to come in and meet us, the iFile team, and the technology providers that will be there, and some of our kind of guest keynote speakers and panelists, then tickets are available through the website. So head there and pick up your tickets.
Thanks a lot, Sam.
Sam, there's some questions.
We've got a couple more here now. I will.
Can you see those? Yeah.
Can you please repeat the top KPIs? So the top 4 I will run through again. I'm assuming it's maybe the 4 rather than the 10, but I'll do the top 4. Time to process a single invoice. Invoices processed per day per full-time equivalent. The invoice exception rate and on-time payments. But in the notes that and what's available to you tomorrow, the 10 will be there, won't they? We'll put that in a PDF available to people. But they're the top 4, the ones without which Caroline does not think you can survive. Okay. And a question about when do tickets go on sale for Philly?
So the tickets for Philadelphia will be available in the next couple of days. Tickets for Toronto are available right now. Tickets for the UK conference are available right now. Philadelphia will be in a couple of days' time. There's just a couple of final touches we're making before those tickets become available. But I was just going to say, so I've just dropped the top 10 KPIs into the chat as well. So if anyone wants to just pick them out of there, you can do, but we'll also be sending out a document to everyone with these KPIs listed and a bit more information as well.
Okay, and I think one final question or a comment from Charlotte that you'd like to respond to, Caroline, is that right?
Yeah, Charlotte is pointing out that obviously the time to process an invoice and the invoices processed per FTE accuracy is also important. So absolutely, Charlotte, and that needs to be measured as part of the KPI. And the only way to do that is when someone reports back that there's a high level of errors downstream being found. But absolutely, I agree with you that accuracy has got to be part of that focus as well.
Thanks very much. And thanks to everybody for joining in. Thanks for your questions and comments. Thanks to Caroline Adams and Sam Hitchin-Ray. Thanks to you all for joining us. And to access the recording of this webinar and many others, plus the iFile research reports, guides, and other helpful resources, use the link in the chat to join. This webinar will be available on demand on the iFile membership community from tomorrow. Please feel free to share the link in the chat with any colleagues or friends who you think may benefit from watching. Thanks again for joining us. Goodbye.